The year was 1893, and the Oklahoma plains were alive with wind and whispers. A tall, gaunt man named Elias Grant trudged along the dusty trail that led toward Stillwater. His boots were cracked, his face sunburned, and his eyes hollow from years of drifting. He carried only a small satchel and an old harmonica, the only reminder of a life once filled with music, laughter, and a family long gone. As twilight fell, Elias spotted a wooden sign swaying in the prairie wind. The Prairie Rest, Rooms by Mrs. Alden. The faint smell of baked bread and wood smoke drifted toward him. He hadn't felt the comfort of a roof or warm food in months. With a tired sigh, he stepped toward the light. Inside the boarding house, the walls glowed with lamplight and the faint hum of a piano somewhere distant. Behind the front desk stood Clara Alden, a woman in her 40s with auburn hair tucked beneath a faded bonnet. Her eyes carried both kindness and sorrow, the kind that only comes from surviving loss. "Room for one?" she asked. Elias nodded. "If the rate's fair." She smiled softly. "For a soul looking that worn, I'll make it fair." As she handed him a brass key, Elias noticed something strange about the hallway. Each door had a faint outline on one wall, like a panel that had been painted over. He said nothing. But that night the mystery of those walls would begin to whisper to him. Elias's room, room 4, was simple. A bed, a wash basin, a cracked mirror, and faded blue wallpaper curling near the corners. As he unpacked, a cold draft brushed the back of his neck. Moving the dresser aside, he found a thin seam, a hidden door. Curiosity prickled through his fatigue. He pushed gently. The panel gave way with a sigh, revealing a narrow crawl space filled with dust, old letters, and a child's shoe no bigger than his palm. One letter, yellowed with age, read, "If you find this, please tell Mama I made it safe." Elias's heart clenched. That initial L belonged to his own lost daughter, Lydia, who had died years ago. Or so he thought. At breakfast, Elias met the other boarders, Dr. Edwin Finley, a reserved physician who always wore gloves and never spoke of his past, Miss Tessa May, a young schoolteacher whose smile looked borrowed from better days, Jonas Pike, a trapper with a temper and a bottle for a friend. They ate quietly until Clara entered with a tray of cornbread. The room seemed to shift. Every eye softened at her presence. "Eat while it's warm," she said, her voice gentle but firm. No one noticed how her hand brushed the wall as she left, as though feeling for something only she could sense. That night, the wind howled outside, shaking the shutters. Elias lay awake, listening to faint whispers, soft, rhythmic, like prayers through the wall. He followed the sound into the hallway and saw Tessa, barefoot and pale, staring at her wallpaper. "You hear them too," she murmured. "Voices." Together they pressed on the wall near her bed. It creaked open to reveal another hidden door leading to a tiny chamber, bare except for a wooden chair and a half-burned candle. On the wall, scratched in uneven letters, were the words, "For those who must hide to be free." Elias and Tessa exchanged a fearful glance. Whatever this house had been, it had stories buried deep in its bones. The next morning, Clara found them both pale and shaken. "You were exploring where you shouldn't," she said quietly. "Some doors were meant to stay shut." Tessa bit her lip. "What were they for?" Clara's eyes flickered with pain. "For safety. For hope. For people who had neither." Then she turned away, before they could ask more. That day, the truth began to take shape, not in words, but in the way the house seemed to breathe and remember. Elias cornered Dr. Finlay by the porch later. "You know more than you're saying," he said. The doctor sighed, removing his gloves. His hands were scarred. This house was once part of the Underground Railroad, he confessed. Clara's husband built those hidden rooms to hide the runaway slaves fleeing north before the war. Elias's breath caught. But that was decades ago, he said. Finley nodded. Yes, but the ghosts of mercy never leave quietly. Elias returned to his secret chamber that night and studied the little shoe again. Inside its hollow sole was a folded note, the same one he'd read before, signed only L. His heart thudded painfully. He whispered into the shadows, "Lydia, if it's you, forgive me." For years he'd wandered the frontier, blaming himself for leaving his wife and daughter during the fever epidemic. The idea that his child might have been here, hidden, scared, and lost, gnawed at him. At midnight, a horse's hooves thundered up the road. A tall man stepped through the boarding-house door, a sheriff, or so he claimed, though his badge looked dulled and his questions sharp. He demanded to see the ledger, asking about old tenants and secret rooms. Clara's face went pale. "There's nothing illegal here," she said, her voice trembling. That night she knocked on Elias's door. "Don't trust that man," she warned. "He's not here for law. He's here for what's buried." The next day, Clara and Elias searched the cellar for proof that could protect her. Under a warped plank, they found a leather-bound ledger written in code. Names, dates, and routes, records of the enslaved people Clara and her husband had helped escape. But one entry near the end made Elias freeze. Lydia Grant, age 7, arrived weak but smiling. He dropped the book, his voice breaking. "That's my daughter's name." Clara's hands trembled. "Oh, Lord. I never thought I'd meet her kin." Through tears, Clara revealed that a fevered little girl had been brought there years ago by a frightened woman. "She said her name was Lydia," Clara whispered. "She was so weak. We tried to save her, but she passed before her mother returned. We buried her by the old oak." Elias fell to his knees. "Her mother was my wife. She never made it back because she died searching for her." The two stood in silence, bound by shared loss and the ghosts of good intentions. That evening, thunder cracked across the prairie. The stranger returned with 2 deputies, accusing Clara of harboring fugitives and stolen goods. "Search every room," he ordered. "There's something here you don't want found." Elias stepped between them and Clara. "Then start with mine." The deputies pried open the secret door in room 4. A gust of wind roared through the passage, carrying the faint scent of earth and candle smoke. Inside, the wall was covered in names etched into wood, each belonging to someone who had once hidden there. At the top of the list, Lydia Grant. The sheriff studied the carvings for a long time. His voice softened. "These weren't criminals," he muttered. "They were people looking for freedom." He holstered his gun, turned to his men, and said quietly, "Let them be." Before leaving, he tipped his hat to Clara. "You've done God's work here, ma'am." When the door shut behind him, Clara wept. Elias stood beside her, feeling, for the first time in years, that he'd found where he was meant to be. Days later, while repairing floorboards, Elias found a small wooden box tucked beneath the stairs. Inside were relics, a rosary, faded photos, and a gold locket. He opened it. Inside was a sketch of Lydia and her mother. His hands shook. "You kept this," he whispered to Clara. "I couldn't bring myself to throw it away," she said. "Every soul who passed through here left something behind. Sometimes love, sometimes sorrow." Elias carved small wooden markers for each name in the ledger and planted them beneath the oak where Lydia rested. Together, he and Clara created a garden of remembrance, a quiet sanctuary where the wind sang through wildflowers. That night, he played his harmonica for Lydia beneath the stars. The melody was soft, mournful, and full of peace. Spring came. The prairie rest began to fill with new travelers, widows, orphans, and wanderers. Elias stayed on, helping Clara patch the roof and paint the porch. He carved a new sign, the Prairie Rest, a place for all souls. The house that once sheltered fugitives now welcomed anyone seeking refuge, from the law, from grief, or from themselves. One evening, Tessa May gathered her courage. "My father told me stories about this place," she said. "He was one of the men who hid here as a child. He said a woman named Alden saved him." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "Your father was the first one we helped. He was the reason we kept going." Tessa smiled through her tears. "Then this house saved both of us." Him back then, and me now, Elias, took out his harmonica once more. The mournful tune drifted through the halls. Clara began to hum along, a melody her late husband had played on their wedding night. The air felt lighter, as though the ghosts within the walls had finally exhaled. For the first time, laughter echoed again through the prairie rest. Months later, a letter arrived from Illinois. It was from Mary L. Turner, granddaughter of a woman who once escaped through the prairie rest. Enclosed was a check and a note. "My grandmother always spoke of a house with hidden doors that saved her life. She said, 'There's a place on the prairie where kindness built the walls. I want to keep those doors open for others.'